ASMR. Hey. Hi. Hey there. Welcome back to my channel. Tonight's video is our November book of the month. Book of the month, book of the month, book of the month. Book of the month, book of the month. I'm so happy that you're here with me and that we get to hang out for the next 20 minutes or so, just talking about a book. I hope that you've had a great day so far, and I hope that whatever you're doing, that you enjoy the book that I'm going to talk about, and that you are able to relax and rest a little bit. You guys know these are always my favorite to film, so I really hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you enjoy it. As always, we're going to start with some book sounds. And then I'm going to read the book description as written by the author, and any other notable quotes or things of interest on the cover. Then I'll give a little bit of background as well as my own synopsis / opinions about the book, and we will end with me reading the first few pages to you. The first few pages. So without further ado, let me introduce tonight's book. Tonight's book is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. Sorry, it's kind of hard to get a good cover shot because of the glare from the light, but it's a really pretty cover with really pretty character artwork. I think Charlie Bowater is the one who illustrated the cover. And then there's ravens on the back and a bunch of feathers. An enchantment of ravens. Enchantment. Sorry about the airplane that just flew overhead. Is still flying overhead, correction. Okay, let's crack it open. Crack it open and read the description. I feel you. As a type 1 Enneagram, I feel you, and I'm sorry that I just did that. But anyway, we've got our seasonal courts that each have a prince, except for the summer court, which has a king that they refer to as the Alder King. And he's like this Soup's powerful, Soup's old fairy man. And, sorry, he's not a man. If he's a fairy, he's a fairy male. And he has been in power for literally an age. And because he is in power and basically has made the world what he wants it to be, it is only ever summer in Whimsy. So Whimsy knows no other seasons. And that's something that Isabel describes in great detail at the beginning. So, now that we have set the stage, let me tell you about the story, in my opinion. So we have Isabel, who is our protagonist, and she is a very talented painter. Like, knock your socks off. Wow, this girl can really paint, and all the fairies are lining up so that they can have some of Elizabeth's painting because they're just so amazing. Now, here's the kicker. As it was written in the description, no fairy can make anything. They can't make anything for themselves, or they turn to dust and die. So they referred to anything that involves, like, production as a craft. So painting, baking, making clothes, even cooking, writing, anything that would require them to make it themselves, they can't do it. So they are dependent on the humans that live in Whimsy to get things like that. So to get books, or to get fancy dresses, or fancy pastries, or paintings. And obviously, as it is in human nature, when you can't have something, you want it that much more. So all of these things, they crave them, because they can't make them themselves. And so Isabel, you know from the very beginning, is a very esteemed painter, and they talk about her craft as like the best they've ever seen. And she has some very esteemed fair folk patrons that pay her for her paintings with enchantments. So, like, for example, at the beginning of the book, she asks for this character Gadfly that she's been painting a portrait of to enchant her roosters, or chickens, sorry, not roosters, to lay eggs every week so that she can count on their eggs. Or there's an enchantment on her house, and, you know, different things like that that she gets traded for her paintings. And so she's just painting, which she adores more than anything, and doing her thing. And one of her patrons, the one that I mentioned earlier, Gadfly, tells her that he's recommended her work to this character, Rook, who is the Autumn Prince, and tells her that he's gonna come by the very next day to have his portrait done by Isabel. And she's like low-key freaking out because she's never had like royalty, fairfolk royalty in her home before. So she's like, oh snap, I gotta be on my A game. I'm having a prince come over and I've gotta be painting this picture. So she's like running to town, making sure she's got all the supplies that she's gonna need. And this dude Rook shows up, and obviously he's very attractive, even though she knows it's a glamour. So all of these fairies use glamours to make themselves look more attractive because their true nature is kind of freaky looking. She describes them all as having like very gaunt features and being really skinny and thin and tall, and having like long lanky fingers and bony fingers and sharp pointed teeth. So the way that they're described eyes and tousled hair, and he wears all these like copper colors and smells like autumn, which is all very enticing to Isabel, who has only ever known the summer. And they start spending lots of time together while he comes back and forth from Fairyland to Whimsy to have his portrait done. And Isabel is like catching some feelings for this man that's not a man, even though she knows she shouldn't, because, you know, they got that whole star-crossed thing going, and not only is it not acceptable for fair folk and humans to be together, it's like literally the law. It's like the biggest law that you don't break. They call it the good law. Humans and fairies absolutely cannot fall in love. Like, you cannot, or you're forfeiting your lives. They're gonna kill you. So she like knows that she shouldn't be having feelings for Rook. But obviously the heart wants what it wants. Anyway, their sessions come to an end, and she's very sad about it because she doesn't want to stop seeing him. And then he randomly comes back one day and is like fuming, pissed, because she painted sorrow that she saw in his eyes. But fairies don't feel human emotions. So for her to have painted him like that puts him in a bad light, because they're not supposed to feel. And if he comes across this week, and anyone in his court or any of the other courts starts to feel that he's weak, they can basically try to overthrow him by taking his life. So he's like mad, as he should be, because now people are gonna try and kill him, all because she painted a picture where he looked sorrowful. So he's got this idea where he's gonna bring her to the Autumn Court and put her on trial to try and restore his reputation for what she did. But it is not that simple. Once they enter the forest, they encounter lots of obstacles and mayhem. There's this lady called Hemlock. She's not a lady, she's a fairfolk, but she's a female fairfolk. And she is trying to hunt them down, so they're trying to outrun Hemlock. They enter the summer court, and everything is all wonky there. I'm not going to go into detail about why, but it's wonky, okay? You're going to have to take my word for it until you read it for yourself. It's wonky. And they encounter some mischief there as well. And then they end up in the spring court, which is where Gadfly lives. And they come up with this plan to try and explain why Rook has brought Isabel, who is a human, into the fairylands, and they tie it all back to her painting. And I don't want to go into detail because I don't want to spoil anything, but they basically have to justify why they're there, and it cannot in any way, shape, or form look like love, because that's a no-no. And the story unfolds from there. I don't want to say anything else, but you know, it's lots of danger and mischief and forbidden love. Who doesn't love a good forbidden love trope? It's a standalone novel. I don't think I said that at the beginning. So there's no sequel. There's just the one and only Enchantment of Ravens. I thought it was cute. It was a really quick read. I think it's just shy of 300 pages, so it's not a difficult read. I really like this author. I like Margaret Rogerson, so I enjoyed it. It's short and sweet and well written. And I think that's all I'm going to say for my synopsis. So now I will session to finish it. You truly are a wonder, much better than the previous portrait artist. That fellow we had the other day. What was his name? Sebastian Miniwarts. Oh, I didn't like him. He always smelled a bit strange. It took me a moment to realize Gadfly was referring to Silas Merriweather, a master of the craft who died over 300 years ago. Thank you, I said. What a thoughtful compliment. How engaging it is to see the craft change over time. Barely listening, he selected one of the cakes from the tray beside the settee. He didn't eat it immediately, but rather sat staring at it, as an entomologist might have. Having discovered a beetle with its head on backward. One thinks one has seen the best humans have to offer, and suddenly there's a new method of glazing china, or these fantastic little cakes with lemon curd inside. By now I was used to Fairfolk mannerisms. I didn't look away from his left sleeve and kept dabbing on the silk's glossy yellow shine. Yellow, 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 yellow shine. However, I remembered a time in which the Fairfolk's behavior had unsettled me. They moved differently than humans, smoothly, precisely, with a peculiar stiffness to their posture, and never put so much as a finger out of place. They could remain still for hours without blinking, or they could move with such fearsome swiftness as to be upon you before you could even gasp in surprise. I sat back, brush in hand, and took in the portrait in its entirety. It was nearly finished. There lay Gadfly's petrified likeness, as unchanging as he was. Why the Fairfolk so desired portraits was beyond me. I supposed it had something to do with vanity and their insatiable thirst to surround themselves with human craft. They would never reflect on their youth because they knew nothing else, and by the time they died, if they even did, their portraits would be long rotted away to nothing. Gadfly appeared to be a man in his middle 30s. Like every example of his kind, he was tall, slim, and beautiful. His eyes were the clear crystal blue of the sky after rain has washed away the summer heat. His complexion is pale and flawless as porcelain, and his hair the radiant silver gold of dew illuminated by a sunrise. I know it sounds ridiculous, but Fairfolk require such comparisons. There's simply no other way to describe them. Once a whimsical poet died of despair after finding himself unequal to the task of capturing a fair one's beauty in simile. I think it more likely he died of arsenic poisoning, but so the story goes. You must keep in mind, of course, that all of this is only a glamour, not what they really look like underneath. Fairfolk are talented dissemblers, but they can't lie outright. Their glamour always has a flaw. Gadfly's flaw was his fingers. They were far too long to be human and sometimes appeared oddly jointed. If someone looked at his hands too long, he would lace them together or scurry them under a napkin like a pair of spiders to put them out of sight. He was the most personable fair one I knew, far more relaxed about manners than the rest of them, but staring was never a good idea, unless, like me, you had a good reason to. sorcery of thorns. A sorcery of thorns. I'm sorry, the Kindle does not have the same satisfying sounds as an actual book. But A Sorcery of Thorns was the first book that I read by Margaret Rogerson, and it is fantastic. I loved it. It's basically about the protagonist. I believe her name was Elizabeth, which is why I kept trying to call Isabel Elizabeth in my Enchantment of Ravens synopsis. But Elizabeth was raised in a library, and in this world, the books are like sentient and semi-alive. And when these books, some of which contain magic, are mistreated, they become like monsters. So the books have to be taken care of. And basically there is a crime that occurs, and Elizabeth is accused of the crime and is taken into this town by Nathaniel, who's a sorcerer, for her to stand trial for the crime. It's been a minute since I read this, so if I'm getting any part of this synopsis incorrect, it's because I read it back in like April or May or March or April. And Nathaniel is a sorcerer. Elizabeth doesn't trust sorcerers and was raised to like not think very highly of them and to think them mistrustful. And Nathaniel has this little, I don't want to call him a sidekick, but kind of like a sidekick named Silas. And the banter between Nathaniel and Elizabeth and Silas, like anytime he talks, is just like peak dialogue. I loved it. And yeah, that story unfolds from there. Nathaniel and Elizabeth find themselves in the middle of something much larger than they anticipated. And there might be a little bit of romance, but it's good vibes. Very dark academia. Dark academia, dark academia, dark academia, dark academia, dark academia. But yeah, that's my little bit of bonus content for you. If you made it to the end of the first, was recommending A Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson as well. Anyway, thank you for joining me in tonight's ASMR video. I very much enjoyed talking to you guys about books, and I appreciate you taking the time to unwind with me. And I appreciate you letting me ramble as I